Welcome to the Chain Podcast. Today, we're exploring what's beyond reshoring, how manufacturers are actually repositioning production in the face of tariffs, talent shortages, and rapid technology changes. My guest today is Rosemary Coates, the Executive Director of the Reshoring Institute and the President of Blue Silk Consulting. Rosemary is a global supply chain consultant with over 35 years of experience. She's also an expert witness in supply chain litigation and an author of several books, including 42 Rules for Sourcing and Manufacturing in China. Rosemary, welcome to the Chain.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I can't think of a more topical issue than reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring today. You've been talking about reshoring longer than most people have been using the word. When did you first realize it wasn't just a cyclical trend, but more of a structural shift?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, way back in 2012, during the presidential election, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were China bashing like crazy. And I had spent 15 years prior to that helping companies offshore to China. I set up a lot of factories in China, found sources, worked on projects in China. And all this rhetoric, made me feel like, oh, I can't tell anybody what I do for a living. This is awful. But actually, after that presidential election, a lot of my clients started talking about or asking me if it was even possible to bring manufacturing back. And so eventually what happened was I got my team together and we developed a methodology for evaluating whether or not it makes economic sense to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And out of that grew the Reshoring Institute. We've been around since 2014, so 11 years now, and have been working with clients ever since, rethinking their global manufacturing strategy.
Interesting. And when we trace time in supply chain terms, it always seems to be different than regular time frames today. So let's go back just to the last 5 years, because I think that's really an inflection point for a lot of the discussions that we're having today. What's changed? The economics of reshoring or the mindset today about reshoring?
Yeah, I think both. So the mindset came first. There was as I mentioned, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney really set the world on fire in terms of talking about reshoring. And as a result, it was a kind of a steady growth in that conversation over time. And then, of course, after the pandemic, everyone was talking about supply chain. I used to tell people, they'd ask me what I did for a living, and I'd say global supply chain, and their eyes would roll and they'd like, let's go to the bar, right?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
they just weren't that
ask you, what
interested.
kind of chains do you supply? Is it
Exactly.
hardware or a jewelry store? Yeah.
Right. And so after the pandemic, of course, supply chain became headline news, right? And everyone understood the vulnerabilities in supply chain. And I think that's when the idea of reshoring really took off. And so, but businesses are still economic animals. And even though there was a lot of positive thought around potentially bringing manufacturing back to the US, businesses were still making economic decisions about whether it was good economically to make it happen.
Interesting, because the terms have, as we're just talking about, first, we need to understand the terms that individuals are using when they say reshoring or nearshoring. So how should leaders distinguish between reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, and what you called right-shoring?
Yes. So reshoring, of course, is bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., although it's somewhat of a misnomer because a lot of the manufacturing that happens around the world today was never in the U.S. So to say it's coming back isn't quite right. It may be established now in the U.S., but it's not like we're reattracting a lot of manufacturing that went overseas. A lot of it did, but a lot of it, like, for example, example, these huge assembly lines in China where you walk into a factory, there are thousands of people sitting on little plastic chairs, assembling electronics, for 10 hours a day. That kind of manufacturing was never here, and it's not coming back. Nearshoring is bringing manufacturing back close, some to Canada, although it's really limited, but mostly to Mexico. And so that means that it's coming close, but not back to the US. And that's where we're seeing the big trends today. Friendshoring, I think that's kind of a cute term, meaning, goods might go to or be manufactured in a country that's friendly to the US, although those are kind of few and far between these days.
Yeah,
Yeah, with the imposition
interesting.
of tariffs around the world, it's, put a damper on our relationships in a lot of countries.
When you talk about reshoring, is it more about geography? Or is it more about control, risk, and optionality? Give me a sense of how you view it today.
I would say some of both. So certainly optionality. I think that's an appropriate term. But as I mentioned before, businesses are economic beings and economic entities, and they make decisions based on dollars and cents and where you can make it happen. So in order to make a decision to reshore, today there's a lot of variables that go into that decision making. Maybe in the past, when we first started out, a lot of it was about, I would say, economic patriotism, just, bringing manufacturing back because it was a good thing to do. That same decision, whether to go offshore or onshore, in today's environment involves a lot of decision making and lots more variables. So today we're looking at, does it make economic sense? But also, what's the geopolitical situation? What's the tariff situation? There's just lots of variables that go into that same decision today.
Interesting, Rosemary. When you talk about it, and all of a sudden, I think the perception of most people is that when they hear reshoring, they have a picture of a factory returning wholesale to the United States. From your data, is that what's actually happening?
No, in order to make that decision to bring manufacturing back, you really have to look at a factory that's going to be automated. We can't compete on the world stage in terms of labor rates. We did a number of studies over the past couple years. One big one that compared labor rates around the world for 10 job categories, and what we found was in now China's kind of right in the middle. So if you look at the way wages are spread around the world, you can see the US and Western Europe have the highest labor rates. And then there are a bunch of countries in the middle, including China now. Would not be considered a low-cost labor country anymore. And then on the low end are countries like Mexico, Vietnam, India. Mexico, in fact, central Mexico has some of the cheapest labor in the world. We did another comparison recently for all the border cities along the U.S.-Mexico border, and I'll give you an example. San Diego is the minimum wage is $17 and change an hour, something like that. And this 10 miles across the border in Tijuana, the wage rate is $2.59 an hour. So you've got, a 5x labor rate differential. And if your product includes a lot of labor, then you have to look for a low-cost country. So that's one of the first things we do is work with our clients to look at their costed bill of materials and understand how much labor is involved in production of their products.
Rosemary, it's really interesting because you're describing a much more complex reshoring initiative as opposed to a single decision making. You emphasize that reshoring isn't just about relocating the factory, as you're indicating. It takes rebuilding the ecosystem, suppliers, workforce, logistics, policy. Which pieces of the ecosystem are most often missing when companies try to reshore?
I would say the biggest piece that surprises a lot of our clients is the long term, how difficult it is and how long it takes to rebuild your supply chain in the U.S. So it isn't just building a factory. That's certainly one component of it, but also you have to rebuild the entire supply chain because when manufacturing went overseas, so did all the suppliers.
Right.
And so, a lot of parts are only sourced in China, for example, or you're dependent on parts coming from, another part of the world, or you have to redevelop your supplier in the US and work with them to start producing, the products you need. So we usually tell our clients it's 18 to 24 months to rebuild that supply chain.
Interesting when you're talking timeframes, and especially in today's environment where the uncertainty about where to source from, what your pricing, policy is, and where you can, the logistics and all the support necessary as you're talking about. Tariffs were supposed to be a temporary lever, but they appear to become a little bit more semi-permanent.
Yeah.
How have tariffs changed sourcing behavior, not just on paper, but in contracts and in the factory placement?
Yeah, we were hopeful that the tariffs were going to drive a lot of work back to the US, and it just didn't materialize. In fact, in 2025 we lost about 75,000 jobs in manufacturing over the year. So we expected to have a big increase in jobs as well as investment in factories. So there's a couple of factors there. One of the things is that most executives feel that the environment is very uncertain. Once again, we did a survey. We were engaged by the state of New York to talk to C-level executives all across the U.S., and we did that last year. We talked to 18 C-level executives, CEOs, COOs, and chief supply chain officers, and we asked them what were they doing about the tariffs, and to a person, they said nothing. They're doing anything. And that means that, they were taking on additional cost because of the cost to import parts or finished products. Plus, on top of that, the cost was increasing, but also the difficulty in making the economics work to manufacture in the US. And so most of these executives were saying, we're on pause. We don't know what's going to happen from day to day regarding the tariffs. We're not going to make $1 billion investment in a new factory if we don't know if, things change tomorrow. So a lot of the executives told us that they were taking a wait and see attitude. And because of that, investment was pretty low in manufacturing in the US during the past year. I think, there's certainly some bright spots. I mean, we can tell stories about some factories that came back and were successful, but by and large, I think there's a hold on that investment and a hold on that strategic decision until the environment calms down and companies can plan for the future.
An interesting point that you're making here, because in some respects, it's like companies building tariff arbitrage the same way that we used to do labor arbitrage. Now you've
Right.
got to evaluate that. Is that more of an executive issue, or do you see this as much more structural in terms of its impact?
Yeah, that's a really good point because what we're seeing now is these decisions are being made at the C-level. In the past, manufacturing and operations and trade compliance and all that was really pushed down to a lower level in an organization in procurement departments, and they weren't sitting at the table when those strategic decisions were being made. Today's environment is very different. I think CEOs have learned they need input from all the functional areas that are related to operations in order to make an informed decision. And so now, people like trade compliance, I mean, that used to be tucked under, operations or tucked under finance somewhere. In today's environment, that is an important part of the strategic decision because it affects the cost and also, you have to pay attention to the regulations, who can you ship to, and so so forth. All of that has risen to a strategic level in an organization that we've never seen before.
Really, the criticality of the supply chain professional today at an executive level much more acute than at an operational, or as the same responsibilities at an operational level today. I mean, really, the talent here is one of the the challenges that we have. And so, when you take a look at the capabilities, for the next generation of supply chain, what's needed to navigate this type of landscape today. This isn't just about compliance checklists anymore.
Yeah, that's for sure. What we're seeing is, an uplifting of those jobs into a more strategic situation. So it used to be, I've been doing global supply chain management work for 40 years, and it used to be, those decisions were tactical in nature. I mean, we worried about getting all the shipments off the dock at the end of the day, and making sure we had parts available for the factory to build and that sort of thing. Today's environment requires strategic thinking. So it isn't just, are the parts coming in, but where in the world are we sourcing? And how does that fit into our planning models? So that's the other thing. It's this idea that we've upgraded supply chain people to a much more strategic situation. So we've got the tactical people now that are doing the day-to-day operations, and the strategic thinkers that are taking data and looking at variables and making decisions based on information. And we didn't do that so much in the past. Certainly, the use of new tools, data management, AI, all those things are contributing to the strategy of supply chains these days.
Interesting, Rosemary, talking about the automation, and obviously AI is, taking up a lot of the, interest for organizations. Is automation solving the labor problem, or just shifting the skills requirement that we're looking for today?
So that's a complicated question, because I think the skills have changed dramatically. I like to say that we don't have a labor shortage, we've got a skills shortage. So, we have unemployment in the US. We're at 3 point something unemployment rate. So there are people out there that are looking for work, and there are workers available, it's just that they don't have the right skills.
Right.
So my grandfather worked at Hazy Taylor in Warren, Ohio. It's a drinking fountain manufacturer, and he was a metal worker. And I can remember he'd come home from work and he was dirty and he smelled, and he had grease under his fingernails. I mean, it was gross, right? That was my idea of manufacturing. Today's environment, and I live in Silicon Valley, so if you go to a manufacturer around here, you got to get in a bunny suit, and you're in a clean room environment, and everybody's using computers to move production along the manufacturing line. And the same is true across all manufacturing. If you go to a shop floor today, people are using computers to control the inventory, the quality checks. They have to write emails. Their skills are different. I mean, my grandfather would not survive in today's manufacturing environment. He didn't have the skills. And I think that's the problem also, is we've got available workers, but they don't have the right skills. It's no longer okay to just be an unskilled laborer working in an environment. We don't have those kind of jobs anymore.
It's a really interesting point, because there are certain industries that will not come back. I mean, for example, apparel and textile, where the labor arbitrage is so significant that you can't replace that, that
Right.
cost benefit. Are there, manufacturing capabilities that we've lost permanently, or can we rebuild those? And is it worth rebuilding, or using the global supply chain network as a
Yeah.
proxy for rebuilding?
Yeah, I think it's maybe not a matter of bringing manufacturing back, and we can put people to work. The work environment's changed, so the skills that you need and so forth have changed. And also the kind of products that we're making require different kind of manufacturing. As I mentioned before, you walk into a factory in China, for example, or Vietnam, or Taiwan, and you've got thousands of people sitting on plastic stools, working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, assembling tiny parts. That that just isn't the kind of manufacturing we have in the US. We have shed that low-level manufacturing to other countries, as well as the products have changed. So, it's not a matter of it used to be here and it's coming back and we're going to do the same thing. It's not the same. It's not the same. We've evolved. It looks different.
Clearly, and Rosemary, you're describing some of the, sort of shifts away from China. I mean, we've got a China plus one strategy for a number of years. Now we're seeing a very different sort of tack that organizations are taking relative to when they're saying, I'm leaving China. The data tells a little bit more complex story when we're saying that you're leaving China. What does decoupling look like in practice?
Yeah, you're leaving China. Well, I spent so much time in China and set up all kinds of operations there. And I can tell you that leaving is not as easy as, closing the door and turning off the lights and moving to another location. In China, you've got a lot of things to deal with. So, for example, most of your employees in China or many countries in the world are under contract. So when you go to work in a factory, you sign a contract for, say, 2 years. If you decide to close that factory, you have to pay out those contracts. So I have had some difficult conversations, I guess, with CFOs about, millions of dollars in payments to labor in order to remove yourself from a country. So you have to pay out those contracts. Another thing is you've sent your IP overseas. You've sent the blueprints. You've taught them how to make your goods. They know who your suppliers are. So if you decide you're going to leave, it's not like they're going to forget that overnight. They're going to continue to make that product maybe under a different label or different name and sell in the worldwide market. So you've got IP risk there. And then finally, the government may not let you leave. In China, there are industries that are identified as being critical to their economy, and you have to have a permit to shut down a factory, and they may not allow it, or they'll slow walk it for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. So, you can't just snap your fingers and go to another location. It takes a lot of work and expertise, and you should be working with people who know about that environment.
Interesting, because bringing back the discussion that we had on the ecosystem and the labor sources or resources that we have, China is still essential in early stage manufacturing, tooling, scaling up, even when final assembly moves. And to your point, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to decouple every aspect of the supply chain. Is it less about exiting China or more about reducing our dependency on China?
Yeah, I think I would say most of our clients are interested in getting out of China at this point for a number of reasons. I mean, certainly the rhetoric has changed. The administration is encouraging getting out of China. You can see there's risk. And after the pandemic, everybody identified risk in China. So most companies are considering getting out of China, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're coming back. They may move to another low-cost country. They may you have manufacturing in multiple locations. These are strategic decisions at the C-level in organizations, and this is new. We haven't seen that before, so it's difficult to leave a country. Most companies are trying to get out of China because of our dependency there. But I think it'll be years before that happens. There's just a phenomenal amount of manufacturing there that can't be easily replaced around the world.
Rosemary, I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball here. And even though timeframes and planning horizons have shrunk, if we look 5 to 10 years out, is there a replacement for reshoring as the dominant supply chain narrative that we're talking about today?
Well, I think manufacturing will come back slowly, but the kind of manufacturing is going to be fully automated, sophisticated, and will happen slowly over time. Let's take semiconductors as an example. There under the Chips and Science Act, there's a lot of funding that went into rebuilding semiconductors in the US. As you know, we are very dependent on Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing and TSMC in Taiwan. And when China takes over Taiwan, not if, when, I mean, it's going to happen, they could easily shut down shipments to the US. And so we are very, very vulnerable in terms of semiconductors. So it's important for us to build a factory, but the factory takes, billions of dollars and 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Not going to happen overnight. So I think we're going to see some slow rebuilding of automated factories in the US. I'm very optimistic that a lot of manufacturing will come back or be reestablished here, but it looks different. It's not unskilled assembly lines anymore. The skilled the automation is really significant, and the skills required are very different. Instead of putting pegs in holes, now you need to learn how to run a robot that puts pegs in holes, how to fix a robot. These are different kind of manufacturing skills in the future. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but I think it'll take 5 to 10 years.
And interesting, you brought out the CHIPS Act and the factories in Arizona. We're still importing workers from Taiwan to train our teams on how to affect the
Right.
assembly there.
One other thing too is that even if we were to build 1,000 factories, we don't have the electrical grid to support a lot of that. And that's going to hold us back in terms of manufacturing as well. So it's not just about reestablishing the manufacturing. You have to establish the infrastructure, the electrical grid. You have to retrain workers. There's a lot to that decision that is going to require time and a sophisticated look at helping companies bring manufacturing back.
So let me push on that a little bit more, Rosemary. What advice would you give to policymakers who don't, control the workforce, the infrastructure, or the capital investment? What advice would you give them to encourage domestic manufacturing or reshoring?
Yeah, I think the advice that I would give is to, stop the rhetoric so heavily focused on snapping your fingers. I mean, I think it's a matter of not realizing how complicated it is. So, sure, we can switch a factory like we did in the pandemic from making automobiles to making respirators. I mean, that can happen. Those are individual ideas, but it's not going to be a broad kind of collective effort to bring manufacturing back. So I would say you got to tone down the rhetoric a little bit. Think strategically about the long term. I also think it's really important to prioritize what's most important to us. We did have some of that in the past. In the US, we don't have an industrial policy. So that surprised the heck out of me when I found that out. But, we don't have a policy that says this is what we're going to focus on, unlike other countries in the world. France, for example, has a policy for aerospace, Mexico for development of industrial power, China, the Made in China initiatives and so forth. We don't have that kind of policy. So I think, it's time for us to rethink that and to identify the industries that are most important. And there was some of that done in the past, identifying semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, EV batteries, and rare earth elements as being the top 4 things that we need to redevelop in the US. And I think that we need to do more of that. It's strategic thinking. It's also identifying what the most important aspects are for us to continue to grow in the manufacturing sector.
So let me flip the script a little bit. What advice would you give to the executives who do control workforce, infrastructure, and investment about reshoring?
Yeah, well, we're giving lots of advice to clients these days about doing just that. So what we always start off with is making sure you fully understand your costed bill of materials. So what products, where are you vulnerable? In other words, do you have single sources around the world? What's your supply chain look like? How are you controlling it? That's very important, as well as how much labor is involved. Can you automate? Where can you automate? So that's the first thing, the first step that we do. Then we also help clients prepare plan A for bringing manufacturing back, plan B in case something happens. You know, you have another pandemic or a hurricane or a typhoon or a flood or a fire or, you know, whatever. Plan C so that you have another alternative. So, you know, we usually say you have to have alternative actions because the environment is very unpredictable. So, thinking about it all the time, focusing on the economics of it, having options around the world, those things are very important for executives to handle these days.
Rosemary, where can people follow your work and engage a little bit more with the Reshoring Institute?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit and a nonpartisan organization. We have a big website. It's reshoringinstitute.org. We publish all of our research. So, you know, we have a heavy research agenda. All of that's published on the website. It's all free. You can download everything. We don't make you sign up for anything. We think we're providing a public service. And so if you go to www.reshoringinstitute.org, you can find all of it there and our contact information.
Rosemary, I can't thank you enough. The conversation really helped us frame what reshoring is, other than just bringing manufacturing back. After the conversation, it feels like we're building something new here. Thanks for helping us see the difference.
You're welcome. My pleasure.